Hello, everyone. Welcome back to week 2 of the Instrument ACS Rundown. Today, we are in episode 8, where we're going to cover compliances with air traffic control clearances, Area of Operations 3, Task A. So let's get into it. All right. So if you guys are new here, how I go through this is I'm going to show you guys where to find the answers. So if you get stuck in a check ride, you know where to go. So for Area of Operations 3 Task A, we're going to be working with compliance with air traffic control clearances. So under this first knowledge portion, it's including elements and procedures to ATC clearances and pilot control responsibilities. So the main source that we are going to utilize for this section is going to be the FAR/AIM. But I will tell you guys in the beginning, for the most part, when dealing with this, the questions that they're going to be associating this with is what happens in an emergency and how are you going to utilize PIC authority. So obviously with PIC, we have the junction to be able to deviate from any IFR clearance if it is due to an emergency. And we just have to basically, I guess, fill out a report possibly afterwards and just stating like why we had to deviate. When it comes to clearances, it's going to be including our craft. So if we go to here under Pilots Cafe, this is kind of what I showed you guys last week. The craft clearance is going to be the main clearance that they're going to be going over with you in a check ride. They're just going to give you a random clearance that they're going to supply you with, and they just want to make sure that you can write down the appropriate things correctly. You also need to know these specific things: what a clearance void time is, hold for release, release time, an EDCT, and also an abbreviated departure clearance. And that's what we will normally be doing, just clear it as filed, because that is the quickest and easiest way for us to do this. We can also, like I said, utilize the FAR/AIM. And so we can go to chapter 4 under, let's see, ATC clearances. And so this is where it'll give us all of our clearances. So pilot response for our clearance issued, clearances for VFR on top, separation, clearance, and just what a clearance is. And then we can also go to chapter 5 here and then click departure procedures. And this is the main place that you want to go to when it comes to understanding clearances. So we have IFR clearances at an uncontrolled airport. These are a little different than towers. So definitely look at that one. Then we have that pre-taxi clearance. So this is just making sure that, you know, everything is set up at the airport that we're going to. And also at this point, right before we get that craft clearance, we want to get that too. Then we have the taxi clearance, obviously, that we're cleared to taxi. Then we have the abbreviated IFR departure clearance. You are going to want to know this. And like I said, it's nothing any different than what you're always doing right before you go on an instrument flight. So nothing too crazy here. But it's a really good read, especially just to make sure that you have a full understanding of what you're actually doing. Okay. And then if we go back here, just making sure we don't miss anything. Back to air traffic control. Services available to pilots. Nothing there. It's looking like that's about everything that is needed for that. And if we also utilize going to the instrument flying handbook, this also tells us what clearances are as well. So this is a really quick read. It's like 2 pages, and it just gives examples of what clearances are. So if you're just initially getting into this, this would actually be a good resource for you guys to look at, just so you can get comfortable as to what you're actually doing. Alrighty. We covered what you do in a PIC emergency authority situation. I would also really go into this with your instructor as well. For the K3, this is going to be lost comms procedure. So Mia lives on Avenue F. This is going to be here, and it's also going to be highlighted in red right here. And that is because the DPE is probably going to give you like 2 or 3 scenarios in the ground on lost comms and then possibly give you one in the air. I have heard of DPEs doing this, so do not get caught off guard when they ask you possibly a scenario question. So, and we're going to cover this because this is a pretty big portion. So again, when we're losing lost comms, obviously, if we're in VFR conditions, just go back to the airport. Don't even try to continue. There's no reason for that. But if we happen to get into the clouds and now we have to go through this lost communications procedure, this is what we have to do. So, first, here we have the altitude of fly. So, the highest is what we're going to go for in MEA, MEA. So, M is going to be our minimum altitude prescribed for IFR. E is going to be our expected. So what we write in our craft clearance, we expect 500 after 10 minutes after departure. And then A is assigned what we have last been assigned by ATC. We'll fly whatever's the highest. And then once we get that figured out, then what route do we fly? Well, we'll figure that out with AVEF. So A is our assigned route. And if there hasn't been an assigned route, then what we have been vectored to, whether that's to a fixed airway route or what we have been last vectored to. And then if there's none of that, then we'll go to E. E is going to be our last expected route by ATC. That's most likely going to be what we have, last expected and talked to them. And then finally, F is our as filed route. Once we go through that, then we have leaving the clearance. So, is the clearance limit a fix from which an approach begins? So, yes. And if it's yes, we'll start the descent and approach as close as possible to the EFC or ETA. And if no, and we're at an EFC or clearance limit, if there's no EFC given, we're going to proceed to a fix from which an approach begins and start the approach. So this is what happens if we happen to lose comms going into approach that we need to complete. All right, we have covered that. Clearance void times. I will also show you guys, and you guys can take a screenshot of this. This is the notes that I made for craft clearances. So it talks about pilot control responsibilities, basically that we're acknowledging, receiving, and understanding all the clearances that are given. In emergency, like I said, we can go to 91.3 and we are allowed to deviate. And then our operations under IFR controlled airspace, no 91-173, and as well, obviously 91-175. Control responsibilities, basically that they're issuing you to write clearances, they're giving you altitudes that you have to abide by, and also understanding that the pilot acknowledged what they said and they are reading back correctly. And then again, we'll go to 5-2-7 for our clearance void time. This is the area that I would really hit the most, 5-2-7. This gives all the apparent clearances that you really need to know. And then tower en route, not going to go over this, but this is just the service for aircraft going to and from big metropolitan areas, and basically it's an easier route for them to follow. And then we have the IFR clearance route. If you aren't familiar with this, I would really screenshot this that I have blown up right here. Really important. You need to know it, and you will be asked that on the check ride. And always, if you do not understand a clearance, just ask again and just ask repeatedly until you get the whole thing down, because sometimes it can give you really tricky like transition routes that you have to write down in order to get out of whatever airspace that you're in into the required destination. So really make sure you understand those. And then finally, here I have this little setup. If you don't understand how to set up common nav frequencies, you really need to. This is kind of like how I like to put in and how they advise you to do. You have ATIS and ground on the top and bottom, and on the left side you have tower and approach. And that is pretty much it for the compliance of air traffic control clearances. It's everything that you do every single day. So this isn't really anything that they're going to hard hit you on the check ride. They'll notice if you don't understand how to do clearances when you get in a plane. And so this is definitely something that will be tested on throughout the plane, and you just being able to talk with ATC and tower efficiently. So that is it for today.